Good evening and welcome to the Media Prima Arena here at the South Tees Motorsports Park in Middlesbrough for round 3 of the 2018 Indian Motorcycle DTRA UK Flat Track Nationals. The first time here at Redcar for quite some time in flat track action, so looking forward to getting underway with heat number 1. A reminder of the story so far in 2018, it's Toby Hales who leads the way with a win and a second position from the opening rounds, firstly at Kings Lynn and then at Peterborough. He has an 8-point advantage over Gerard Bailo of Spain, his nearest rival, and a 12-point margin to the number 38 George Pickering, who lines up here in this one, heat number 1. Gary Birtwistle also very much in contention. We have a quartet of riders separated by 16 points at the top of the championship standings. Second time we're using the knockout format in 2018, so we'll see how that pans out as the meeting goes on, and we'll keep you up to date, of course, with all the permutations. Heat number 1 here then, it's Rob Meir, George Pickering and Richard Mason from the front row, the favourites and the top performers of this group in qualifying. Richard Roden, George Sturgis and Kai Fort on row 2, and finally Tim Orcott, Martin Mills and James O'Hara complete the third and final row of the grid. It's 9-round rider races in the opening round, with the top 3 progressing from each race directly through to the semi-finals. The remainder will go through again to a repechage heat, heat 5 or 6, an elimination race from which the top 6 riders will progress through also to the semi-final stage. Just waiting for the riders off the back row, Tim Orcott and James O'Hara, to slot into position, and then we'll be ready to go with heat number 1. Great performance in qualifying from Rob Meir. This is a track, of course, that he's raced in Speedway, albeit some time ago, and he'll be hoping to make best possible use of that pole. The inside starting position here for heat number 1 as we get underway. Not a good start for George Pickering, the number 38 at all. It's Robert Meir who takes the whole shot, moves Richard Mason wide coming off turn number 2, going very deep further back down the order. It's George Sturgis. That's going to cost him a lot of positions, but early on the riders tiptoeing around this circuit. It looks as though it's been quite heavily watered, and the riders just struggling to keep it down to the inside line. George Pickering doing that back into turns 1 and 2 sends Richard Mason way wide, and Mason now under pressure from Richard Roden, who's come through and into 4th position, but breaking well clear out in front. It's Rob Meir who hasn't got caught up in the fight behind him between George Pickering and Richard Mason, one which George Pickering seems to have consolidated now up in P2. He ran wide in the early stages. Mason came through, he fought back to the inside line, and as I said, now quite significant gaps separating the top 3 who were qualified in this order, started in this order, and it looks as though we're going to have the top 4 finishing in the order that they qualified through to this one, heat number 1. As I said, the riders look as though they're slightly uncomfortable on this circuit early on as they go side by side further back down the order. George Sturgis, who got it way wrong early on in the race, trying to recover around the outside. It looked to Martin Mills there, so this is not going to be a good result at all for George Sturgis, who stranded further down the order, down now to 8th position as we come towards the closing stages of this heat number 1. A few riders shaking their heads, and in fact George Sturgis now pulled up on the infield after a late race drama, so this really is going to be a disaster for him. He's consigned to last position. We're only going to have 8 finishers in this one, heat number 1, but the rider who's going to top them as they come down the back straight for the final time, he had a good look over his shoulder just to make sure and check on the progress of his rivals, but it's going to be a comfortable race win for the number 500 Rob Meir. Second over the line is George Pickering, and Richard Mason will go through direct to the semi-final stages in 3rd. A bit of dicing early on for 2nd and 3rd positions, but that one stacked down as you might have expected. The 3 riders on the front row of the grid taking the 3 qualifying places through to the semi-finals. As I said, the battle was early on between George Pickering and Richard Mason. Pickering having taken 2nd place from the start, then running wide on the top turn. Mason coming through, Pickering then bundling back past to take P2. And as I said at the time, the top 4 qualifiers to that race, taking the top 4 positions in the race, heat number 1. Meir the winner then, ahead of Pickering in 2nd position. Richard Mason taking 3rd. Those all moving through to the semi-final stages. And the riders who will have to fight for their lives in the last chance qualifiers. In 4th position, Richard Roden. 5th, Kai Fort. 6th, Tim Orcott. 7th, Martin Mills. 8th, James O'Hara. And of course, George Sturgis, who was a non-finisher there in heat number 1. Now we move on to heat 2. Likewise, the top 3 progress, where we see the 3 front row riders automatically transferring to the semi-final stages again here. It's Michael Dijkstra, Gary Birtwistle and Sean Kelly, the 3 riders from the front row. The middle row, Paul Young, Christopher Jenner and Brad Hardman. At the back row, Vince Hurst, Gary Inman and Les Stevens. Good start there of gate number 2 from Gary Birtwistle. Dijkstra, though, is the last to slow down for turn 1. He runs across the turn slightly. Birtwistle tries to get back up the inside, but it's Dijkstra who's made a good move there on the first 2 turns. He didn't make the best of starts. He was on the inside and possibly a slightly slipperier portion of the circuit as they go side by side further back. It's Paul Young coming through on the inside of Sean Kelly, and this is a critical potential pass for Paul Young because this is the last of the automatic transfer spots through to the semi-final stages, and it looked to me as though Paul Young has made that move stick, and Kelly now runs wide on the top turn, dropping back now and into the clutches of Christopher Jenner for 4th position. But it's only the top 3 places that really matter, and Paul Young has started to break clear of that as Jenner does indeed get the better of Sean Kelly. So Sean Kelly from 3rd on the grid has lost 2 places, and Paul Young, who is one of the pro class riders in this race, has managed to get into the top 3 places. Kelly battling back now on the outside line of Christopher Jenner, who was slightly tentative back into turn 1, and Kelly's made a good pass around the outside line there. Can he make it stick as they come into the pits turn once again? Dijkstra comfortably clear. Gary Birtwistle's going to take 2nd, and that early overtaking manoeuvre from Paul Young appears to have given him a position in the semi-final stages. Big gap now behind the top 3, and those will be the 3 riders who march through. Fight behind, as I said, between Chris Jenner and Sean Kelly over 4th position, but it's not going to be enough to make a direct transfer spot through to the semi-finals because, as I've said, the top 3 have pulled well clear, and Michael Dijkstra of the Netherlands, who hasn't had it all his own way in the early part of this season, an 11-point score last time out at Peterborough, though he had a couple of good races, just couldn't quite make it work for him in the grand final, but he comes up with a race victory in his opening heat race in this format, which will be new to him. He didn't take part in the opening event of the season at Kings Lynn, but Michael Dijkstra looking good there in heat number 2 and qualifying along with Gary Birtwistle and Paul Young. Fight was in the early stages. Paul Young coming through on Sean Kelly and for 3rd position. Kelly dropping as far back as 5th before managing to get back around the outside of Christopher Jenner to take 4th position. So look at the results in full then from heat number 2. It's a win for Michael Dijkstra ahead of Gary Birtwistle and Paul Young. Those 3 transfer directly to the semi-final stages. Sean Kelly, Christopher Jenner involved in a battle for 4th position. Sky Adams, Vince Hurst, Gary Inman and finally Les Stevens will all go again in the last chance repechage in this round number 1, heats 5 and 6. Moving straight on with heat number 3, the action flowing thick and fast. The inside of the front row here will be Gerard Bilo, currently 2nd in the series standings, and looking forward to seeing him go up against his championship rival Toby Hales later on. Also on that front row, Jordan Miller, the number 19, and Leah Toklove, good qualifying from her. She completes that front row. The middle row, Wesley Aegis, the intermediate riders, packing out the remainder of the grid for this one. Heat number 3, Matthew Porter alongside him, the current championship leader in the intermediate class, and Ronald Shamir, the number 48. And the back row of the grid, the number 32, Andrew Murphy, and the 137, that's Tom Moore, who failed to score last time out at round number 2, his first appearance of the 2018 campaign. Just getting Wesley Aegis settled in here. He had confused himself, I think, being the 4th rider up to the grid. He tried to line up off the outside of the front row, but of course it's 9 rider races in the opening round these days under this knockout format, and Aegis has now settled in off the inside of that middle row. Underway then with heat number 3. Good start from Gerard Bilo, particularly poor start from Jordan Miller. And Miller's going to have to come back through into the qualification positions if he wants to take an automatic transfer spot, because he's been pushed down to 4th place. He dives back down the inside into turn number 3, but it's Matthew Porter, the top performer in the Intermediate Championship, the winner of the opening round in the Intermediate class at Kings Lynn, who holds 3rd position for now, a finalist at Kings Lynn as well, looking set to move through directly to the semi-final stage. He's under some pressure here though from Jordan Miller. Miller takes a good line around turn number 3, and Porter locks up and through comes Miller for 3rd position. So Miller's managed to find his way back into the top 3, and we could be in a situation where the top 3 on the grid take the automatic transfer spots to the semi-final stages, as we saw in heat number 1, but Miller having to do it the hard way, didn't get a good run down to the first turn off 2nd on the grid. Porter finding his way through from the 2nd row, but now consigned to 4th position and starting to drop back as this race goes on. Wesley Aegis further back, fighting with Ronald Shamir over 5th position. Shamir showed well on the opening lap there and from the outside of the middle row of the grid, but he's starting to come under some pressure now. Here is that battle. Ronald Shamir holding it for now. Wesley Aegis ducking back to the inside line around turns 1 and 2, but locking it up ever so slightly. And Shamir holding a decent line, a decent run. A big point score at the opening round, Ronald Shamir. Failed to score last time out at Peterborough, and he's involved in a fight further back down the order. But it's only the top 3 positions that count really in the opening 4 races of the day to determine the qualifiers through to the semi-final stages. And it's going to be Gerard Bilo who takes the checkered flag. His first race victory of the day, of course, in his first ride. Leoto Club with a great performance there for second, and another rider who rose up through the DTRA ranks, Jordan Miller, earning an automatic transfer spot through to the semi-final stages there in 3rd position. It's been a tough start to this season for Jordan Miller, who has only finished in the minor placings, yet to take a first grand final appearance of 2018, but it was a good effort from him there in heat number 3. So he's among the 3 riders marching on: Gerard Bilo, Leoto Club and Jordan Miller through. Matthew Porter in 4th position. Wesley Aegis eventually getting the better of Ronald Shamir, but those 2 riders will have to go again in heats 5 and 6, as will Andrew Murphy and Tom Moore, who rounded out the finishers there. Up to the line now for Heat 4. So far, of the 9 riders lining up off the front row of the grid, 8 of them have made it through direct to the semi-final stages. Will we see more surprises in this one? Certainly looks one of the more even lineups of this opening round. Toby Hale's the clear favourite, goes off the inside of the front row. James Andrew, great performance to get off the front row here. And Mike Hill completes that front row. Sam Hurst, Grant Martin and Joe Banks the middle row. Brad Hardman, Lucia Orcott and Jake Mason off the rear as we get underway. Sam Hurst with a good start, not a good one at all from the number 16 Grant Martin. He's got a lot of work to do here. Toby Hale's breaking clear around the first 2 turns. Mike Hill holding on to 3rd position behind James Andrew, where as we were from the start, the top 3 qualifiers in that order as things stand, but Joe Banks and Sam Hurst trying to come through the field. Sam Hurst, who hasn't had a great start to this 2018 campaign, it must be said, battling around the inside line. Banks moves out Mike Hill. That gives an opportunity for Hurst to make 1 position. Hurst is now through to 4th position, but it's Joe Banks who occupies the last of the transfer spots as things stand. Grant Martin coming through up the inside there of Mike Hill, who's gradually slipped backwards in this race, having qualified 3rd on the grid for this one, heat number 4. He's now well down the order and starting to come under pressure from Jake Mason. So Hill will hope for better in heats 5 and 6. There's no way he's going to make it through from this one. In fact, slowing up there on the top turn, and through up the inside of him does come Jake Mason. Now the focus is on the battle for 3rd position. Sam Hurst trying to find a way past Joe Banks. It's Banks who has the position for now, the number 36. The rest of the pack well spread out. Hurst locking it back to the inside, coming off the pit turn, trying to get his wheels in line early. This is the key focus, the last of the qualification positions. Banks holding on to it for now, having come through up the inside of Mike Hill for 3rd position. From the outside of the middle row of the grid, this has been a good ride from Joe Banks. He's holding on to it for now, but Sam Hurst is closing. Sam Hurst, remember, the pro rider. Joe Banks, the intermediate competitor. So they're in separate championship battles. Joe Banks, the winner of the intermediate class last time out at Peterborough, looking to do another giant killing mission here today at Redcar. Closing stages and drag race down to the line, and it is going to be Joe Banks who holds on ahead of Sam Hurst in 4th position. So Hurst, the pro rider, who, as I said, hasn't had a steady start to 2018, not quite as strong as he was last season. 11 points from the 2 rounds so far. He sits 8th in the series standings, and he hasn't made it through as an automatic qualifier from round number 1, which, well, you might have suspected to an extent, because he didn't qualify among the top 3 into that heat number 4. But it was Joe Banks, who was only the 6th qualifier to that race, who really upset the apple cart and coming through as the 3rd finisher in that one, heat number 4. So a good effort there from Joe Banks, an inside pass on Mike Hill, and he marches on directly to round number 2, to the semi-final stages, along with James Andrew and Toby Hales, who did their work from the start. Sam Hurst will be the first of the non-qualified riders from that one, heat 4, who will move to heats 5 and 6. The first of those eliminators coming up next. Grant Martin, Jake Mason, Lucia Orcott, Mike Hill and Brad Hardman also going to the eliminators. So we now move on to the first of our knockout races here this evening, heat number 5. The next 2 races will see 12 riders eliminated and decide positions 25 to 36 in the meeting overall. The starting grid itself determined on the basis of finishing positions from these riders in the opening 4 races of the day as round 1 continues. Heat number 5 then, Matthew Porter and Sean Kelly lining up off the inside 2 starting positions after finishing 4th in their opening outings. Wesley Agers and Christopher Jenner, 5th place apiece, complete the front row. The middle row, Ronald Shamir and Vince Hurst, who finished 6th in their opening outings. Andrew Murphy and Sky Adams, who finished 7th. Gary Inman and Tom Moore lining up off the back row, along with Les Stevens. Getting underway then, 2 pro riders in this one won't want to fall as early as the opening round. Vince Hurst has made incredible progress there from the middle row of the grid. He's straight through up into 4th position and inside the qualifying positions as it stands. Watch for the number 95 then. He's gone a little bit deep though on the top turn. He's going to see if he can try and square it off coming off turn number 4. Matthew Porter and Sean Kelly, 2 of the top performers from the Adult Intermediate Championship, are fighting it out over top spot. The series leader and round 1 winner, it is Matthew Porter out in front, ahead of Sean Kelly in 2nd. 3rd place is with Christopher Jenner. Meanwhile, Vince Hurst is starting to come under pressure now from Wesley Agers, but Agers too is inside the qualification positions with Ronald Shamir, the number 48, battling on his tail as they come around turns 1 and 2. Then it's Sky Adams, who's the first of the riders set to be eliminated from this race as things stand. Sky Adams sitting in 7th place, needs to make progress here or risk failing to score for the 3rd round in succession since her first appearance in the pro category. Obviously early days in her career, still learning the ropes at pro level, but Sky Adams set to bow out in the opening round, and that's far from ideal for Sky. Vince Hurst at the moment holding on still ahead of Wesley Agers, and there is Ronald Shamir, the rider who occupies the last of the automatic transfer spots through to the semi-final stages. So the top 3 breaking away, then it's Vince Hurst in 4th. Sky Adams starting to build some momentum now midway through this race, but time ticking away for her to make progress on Ronald Shamir, who sits in 6th position, and we could see the first of our pro riders eliminated here tonight as early as heat number 5. Vince Hurst still running the wider line, and Wesley Agers still looking for a way to prize past, but at the moment it's not on, and the race is going to be settled in the drag race down to the line. Sky Adams is going to miss out in 7th position, and actually Sky only just finishing ahead of Gary Inman in that one, heat number 5. A great win for Matthew Porter, he keeps his night alive, as does Sean Kelly in 2nd place, Christopher Jenner in 3rd, Vince Hurst in 4th, Wesley Agers in 5th, and Ronald Shamir in 6th position. We see Sky Adams, Gary Inman, Andrew Murphy, Tom Moore and Les Stevens all bowing out in the opening round. So those are your eliminated riders then from heat number 5, settling the minor placings here this evening, and the first of the Adult Intermediate Championship points will be awarded in that one. But Sky Adams, the first pro rider eliminated here tonight, will leave Redcar empty-handed in terms of championship points. Next up is heat number 6, the second of our elimination races, and another couple of surprise pro riders who are lining up in this one. On paper, this is the stronger of the elimination races from round number 1. We've got 4 pro riders on the front row. We've got further pro riders further back, Jake Mason off the middle row and Mike Hill off the back row. So we do have 6 pro riders. You'd expect them to all move through, but Mike Hill looked to have mechanical problems first time out, and he's got to come through from the back row of the grid here. Hurst and Roden, who finished 4th first time out, they'll be the favourites. Grant Martin and Kai Fort finished 5th, and then Jake Mason and Tim Orcott, who finished 6th in their opening rides. Those are the top 6 coming into this race, but it's Martin Mills who's made a great start from the middle row of the grid to immediately start to make progress and contact midway through the pack there, and down goes the number 16, Grant Martin. He was collected on the way in by the looks of it there by Sam Hurst. Grant Martin, who started on the front row, 3rd on the grid. This race is going to have to be stopped. The red lights do indeed come on and the red flags come out, but at the moment the first concern is for Grant Martin, who is somewhat stuck under his machine there, the number 16 bike by the looks of it. Martin collecting, as I said, with the number 116 Sam Hurst coming around the first 2 turns, and then he was just going onwards in a straight line before collecting the rider on the outside of him, and that is real disappointment for Grant Martin. And hopefully he is okay to go again in the restaging. We're lining up here for a second time of asking. Grant just having words with Anthony Brown on the infield as he confirms his participation by the looks of it, because Grant Martin is back on board the machine and back round towards the start line. So brave stuff from Grant Martin. There were a few pieces of bike hanging around there on the exit of turn number 2. but Martin is going to come back into line by the looks of things for a second time of asking at heat number 6. It was only the first 2 turns, so no penalty being applied to Grant Martin, who will get a second opportunity to start off the front row here. He'll want a steady race this time around because it's only the top 6 positions that the riders need, so they don't need to really come up with massive exploits to make it into the top 6. If they're already lining up off the front row, they just need to defend their positions. Sam Hurst off the inside then of the front row. He's the rider to watch, the highest ranked in the championship standings of this group of 12, and it's Hurst who has taken the whole shot. The number 70, Richard Roden, looking around the outside line on the first 2 turns. A smooth and safe first 2 turns this time around from Grant Martin, who's still inside the qualification positions. Battling around the outside of him now, it's Martin Mills. Another good start from the middle row from Martin Mills, and he's looking through for a place through to the semi-finals. Remember, the bottom 6 will bow out at this stage, and at the moment Tim Alcott and Jake Mason, the pro rider who started up in 5th on the grid, is outside of those qualification positions and not looking set to make too much progress from further down the order either. Here's the top group, the top 5 in fact, who've broken slightly clear of Martin Mills, and Mills, the number 136, has the rest of this race to try and defend the last of the qualification positions from an absolute pack of riders that's developing behind him. There goes Mike Hill, making 1 position around the outside, and we've got a faller on the first 2 turns, and Richard Roden's gone down in the path of the pack behind him, and Martin Mills moves up to 5th, but he might be about to lose that 5th place because George Sturgis comes thundering down the inside of him, the number 155, through for 5th. Martin Mills is relegated back down to 6th position once again. Mills is under pressure from the group directly behind. Kai Fort and Grant Martin have managed to escape a little bit away from the rest of that group, but both were impeded by the fall directly ahead of them, and that really is going to shake things up in heat number 6 because Richard Roden, who was inside a qualification position, has fallen from that qualification position and is eliminated. Sam Hurst has broken well clear. He will take the checkered flag, his first race victory of the day that sees him through to the semi-final stages. Second over the line eventually in that one will be Kai Ford. 3rd place going the way of Grant Martin, and then 4th position to George Sturgis ahead of Martin Mills, and finally Mike Hill, who completes the automatic qualifiers from that one. The rest of the group eliminated. Jake Mason in 7th, Tim Alcott in 8th, dropping a couple of places as the race went on. Brad Hardman in 9th, Lucia Alcott in 10th, James O'Hara in 11th, and of course Richard Roden the faller. So drama in heat number 6. It looked as though the race was settling down, but a fall for Richard Roden shook things up once again. Sam Hurst breaking clear, Kai Fort also moving through. So the majority of the pro riders in that one, heat number 6, marching forward, but it's Jake Mason who is eliminated in 7th position, the second of our pro riders to be eliminated, and our second non-scoring pro rider here tonight. We continue the elimination theme then as round 2 gets underway, firstly with the semi-final stages. The semi-finals seeing 1 rider eliminated from each. The rider who finishes in 12th position in semi-final number 1 and in semi-final number 2 will go home after an early shower. But the main focus in these semi-final races will be on the top 5 in each, who will move directly through to the grand final. The next riders who finish above 12th position but behind the top 5, they will meet one another in the last chance qualifier to determine 2 final riders who progress through here tonight among the top 12 who will score the vast majority of the championship points. Starting positions being selected on the basis of performances in the previous round, round number 1. So starting with the riders who made automatic transfer from the first 4 heats of the day, and then we'll see the riders who made it through from the eliminators selecting their starting positions. You can see the first 4 riders out onto the track. The automatic qualifiers from the first 4 races of the day have selected their starting positions. It'll be Gary Birtwistle, Gerard Bailo, Michael Dijkstra and Leah Toklov off the front row. And as you can see, the second row is now also complete. Sean Kelly, Paul Young, Matthew Porter and Jordan Miller going off the middle row. The back row being comprised of Ronald Shamir, Wesley Aegis, Christopher Jenner and Vince Hurst. Only the top 5 will move direct to today's grand final, and that's where the focus will be. The favourites off the front row. Not a good start from Leah Toklov. She's in danger of being swallowed up by the group behind from the middle row. Sean Kelly leading that charge in the mid-track, coming off turn number 2. Michael Dijkstra and Gary Birtwistle battling it out. It looks as though Dijkstra's got around the outside of Birtwistle, who locks it back to the inside to cover across the front of Leah Toklov, who still leads a separate group from 4th position down. The front three starting to break away, and Toe Club now under pressure. Young comes around the outside line and through into 4th position. Those two riders still both inside the qualification places, but Sean Kelly is battling with them. Young makes a momentary error coming off the pits turn, and he drops outside of the provisional qualification places, with Sean Kelly now coming through into 5th position. It's Leah Toe Club who holds 4th place on the inside line, making the lads around her do the hard work around the outside, and it's Young who's starting to drop back now from the 2 places ahead of him that are all important in the bid for automatic qualification through to the grand final. Christopher Jenner and Vince Hurst directly behind Young, waiting for an error from the group up ahead of him, as Sean Kelly looks slightly wider than Leah Toe Club, but still isn't leaving enough room for Paul Young to try and get back on turns, and Young starting to drop back as a massive gap now emerges behind the top 3. Those 3 look set to move directly through to the grand final, but the focus in their regard was on the top 2 who would move through direct to the front row of the grid for today's grand final, and it looks as though Bilo and Dijkstra, the 2 international riders, will be doing exactly that, because Gary Birtwistle is starting to slip back from them now in 3rd position, but still well clear of Leah Toe Club, and Toe Club slowing up. Toe Club slows up on the pits turn. Through comes Sean Kelly, through comes Paul Young, and that's going to be a real reprieve for the number 75 Paul Young, who, if he can consolidate and hold on to that position in the latter stage of this race, will march directly through to the grand final, as we see Leah Toe Club stranded on the infield, the bike letting her down, and that is going to cost her not only a place in the grand final, but also a place in the LCQ. She's not going to finish this semi-final number 1 and will be eliminated before the LCQ even gets underway. The leaders into the last lap now, as we see the big gap between 2nd and 3rd positions, but it's going to be Gerard Bilo around the final 2 turns, the Spaniard, to make it 2 wins out of 2 and transfer through direct to the grand final, and he will be among the first 2 riders to choose starting positions for the final as the winner of semi-final number 1. Bilo gets there then ahead of Dijkstra, Birtwistle, Sean Kelly, and eventually Paul Young, the top 5, the 5 who march on to today's grand final direct. And the real frustration for Leah Toe Club, who goes from hero to zero in a couple of moments there, the bike letting her down while she was in an automatic transfer spot, and that retirement means that despite the fact that she finished 2nd in her opening ride, that she sat for the majority of her 2nd ride up in 5th position, she is going to be eliminated without even the opportunity to ride in the LCQ. She finished 12th effectively in semi-final number 1 as a DNF, and is eliminated as early as the first race in round number 2.
Yeah, it's much better that way, but it's so much easier to get lost.
The first semi-final then showing up the brutal nature of this format, with Leah Toe Club going from a qualification position to an elimination position in the first of our 2 semi-finals. The second semi-final now out onto track, and the number 20 Toby Hales had first starting position selection, having been the winner of heat number 4. He is already up into position. Rob Meir, the 2nd rider to choose. He lines up directly on the inside of Hales. And then the number 79, James Andrew, runner-up in Heat 4, has gone for the inside of the front row, leaving the outside of that front row available. And that is now taken by George Pickering. So our front row will be James Andrew, Rob Meir, Toby Hales and George Pickering. Riders now making their selections for the middle row of the grid, where we see the first of the riders who've come through from the elimination races. Kai Fort and Sam Hurst will be lining up off that middle row. It looks as though we've got Fort off gate number 3 and Hurst from the outside. The inside of that middle row, Richard Mason, and alongside him Joe Banks. So the middle row, Richard Mason, Joe Banks, Kai Fort and Sam Hurst. And the back row now completed by Martin Mills, Jake Mason, George Sturgis and Mike Hill. Just waiting there momentarily for Jake Mason, the number 444, who now seems to have the machine started and is ready to go. A little bit of confusion around the lineup for this one, because Jake Mason, having finished 7th position in heat number 6, should already have been eliminated, but he's up at the start line, and I wonder whether that's a timing issue, because looking back at the official results from heat number 6, Grant Martin appears down in 11th position, but actually came over the line in 3rd. So Grant Martin has now been sent out onto the track and will complete the lineup, but we've got a very unusual situation here where Jake Mason really hasn't qualified to make it through to this semi-final number 2, and we've got 13 riders up at the start line for the second semi-final. We're going to get underway as such anyway, and I'm sure things will settle themselves fairly in the duration of this race. They've got a long way to come back here, the riders of the back row of the grid. It's Rob Meir who takes the whole shot, side by side for second. George Pickering's done a good job. Oh, an almighty pile up down the back straight, and multiple riders involved. George Sturgis, the last of them to go down. Matthew Porter, another of the adult intermediate riders, is down with him. Real concern for Richard Mason, the number 98, who was one of the first to take a massive perler there. Joe Banks involved in the mix as well. Real chaos down the back straight, and we can only hope that all of the riders involved are okay after what was a nasty impact here at Redcar. Real frantic activity there on the first 2 turns that eventually caused that rather dramatic incident on the back straight. Sam Hurst connecting with Richard Mason. Hurst trying to get back across to the inside. Mason was moving out to try and block the pair coming together. It was Sam Hurst who was sent sprawling towards the safety fence. Hurst then coming down, and Richard Mason, who was under control at that point, had no way to go to try and avoid him. So both of them coming down, and then a separate incident with the large group of riders behind them all trying to find a way to come through. Martin Mills connecting with the number 40. Kai Fort then going down, and we got several riders here attended to by paramedics, and I suspect that we will have a much reduced lineup for the restaging of semi-final number 2. All of the riders are eligible to come back up to the start line. It was only the first 2 turns of the race and down the back straight on the opening lap, but as the riders are called back into position for the race staging of semi-final number 2, as I say, I suspect that we will lose a few of our riders before we get underway for this one, and that could settle various championship points, particularly in the pro class, with the vast majority of the riders being involved in that incident actually pro riders. So let's see who is fit and able to take their place in the restaging of semi-final number 2. James Andrew there just settling back onto the inside of that front row. Rob Meir, Toby Hales and George Pickering. Those 4 riders were all clear of the carnage behind them. Sam Hurst, that's good to see. He's back up to the line, the number 116, who was one of the riders involved in that crash. He lines up once again off the outside of that middle row, having fought his way through from the eliminator to get here. We've lost Kai Fort due to that crash, and we've lost Richard Mason as well. So a reduced middle row of the grid as we get underway. We're not going to see a rider of the remaining riders in this race now eliminated, but we are going to see a frantic battle as Sam Hurst goes down in the same place that he and Richard Mason went down in the initial running, and Rob Mears thundered down the inside of George Pickering and sends him spiralling out of control. We've lost Martin Mills by the looks of it to a mechanical problem right at the start line as well, so with 2 further riders down now. Mills though should be able to get that back going again. Fingers crossed for him to continue on in the race. He has indeed. Martin Mills rejoins the race, but Sam Hurst hasn't rejoined the race. He's pulled up on the infield, so real chaos in semi-final number 2. Hurst losing control and going down on the racing line down the back straight, and thankfully this time the majority of the pack able to avoid him in quite straightforward fashion. Out front, Rob Meir. It was a very aggressive manoeuvre there on George Pickering, and Pickering was none too pleased about it, shaking his head on the pits turn first time around. Toby Hales has come through up into second position, so it should be Meir and Hales joining Bilo and Dijkstra on the front row of the grid for this grand final, and George Pickering should be lining up off the middle row of the grid, coming in third position in this one. James Andrew in line for a place on the middle row of the grid for the grand final as well. He sits in fourth position, and the rest of the pack starting to filter through, but we're going to have some real surprises in this one because of the volume of pro riders who firstly crashed out in the initial running of semi-final number 2, and then of course we've lost Sam Hurst from the second staging of semi-final number 2. We've got a real battle on directly behind. Grant Martin occupying the 5th and final automatic transfer spot just up ahead of Joe Banks. Banks trying to find a way through. If he can do so, it will guarantee him a place in the grand final, and he'll be looking good for a place on the podium in the Adult Intermediate Championship. Remember, 2 separate categories going on at once here in this pro race, semi-final number 2. Rob Meir has the race as things stand. Toby Hales is trying to hunt him down. He's dropped George Pickering, who holds on for third position. Meir covers the inside racing line. Hales has got to go the long way round and can't get there. So it is an impressive second race victory of the day for Rob Meir, a first defeat of the meeting for Toby Hales, who won his opening ride, remember. Third place goes the way of George Pickering. He's also safely through to the grand final, as are James Andrew and Grant Martin, two of the lesser lights in the pro category, just holding on ahead of Joe Banks. So Martin doing some good defensive riding on the closing couple of laps there, with Banks menacing and trying to find a way through. Banks already beat Martin on one occasion back in heat number 4, so in his round 1 heat race, but Banks will have to go again this time around. 2 races in succession for him, as he will line up in the last chance qualifier, and we'll wait to see which of our decimated field will be taking part in this one, because we had 5 non-finishers in semi-final number 2. Round 2 turning into something of a demolition derby then. Let's hope we get more finishers in the LCQ. 4 of the riders who were eligible for this race were all withdrawn, of course, in semi-final number 2. Richard Mason, Sam Hurst, Kai Fort and Jake Mason all qualified to the LCQ on countback as a result of their performances in round number 1, despite their DNFs in semi-final 2. But they are all withdrawn after their respective incidents in that race. 2 further withdrawals from this one, Vince Hurst and Ronald Shamir. So that leaves us with a 7-rider field only out of what would normally be a 12-rider race for the LCQ. The top 2 move forward to today's grand final. This is going to be a critical race. The front row completed then. Jordan Miller, Joe Banks, Christopher Jenner and George Sturgis. And the middle row will be Martin Mills, Matthew Porter and Wesley Agius. There is no back row with 7 riders only. But this is going to be a critical race in the context of the Intermediate Championship. We've got 3 of the top 4 in the series standings lining up in this one, and there's only 1 pro rider up against them, Jordan Miller. So 1 rider at least from the intermediate category is guaranteed to move through to the grand final to join Sean Kelly, who took 4th position in semi-final number 1 and is the top performing adult intermediate rider so far here today. Kelly, though, well back in terms of the championship standings, so an important meeting for the number 33 to try and make up lost ground. But some of his series rivals lining up in this one would like an opportunity to make it onto the podium, and they'll need to progress through to the grand final, one suspects, to achieve it. Good start from Joe Banks off gate number 2. Poor one from Chris Jenner, the number 134, and it's Banks, the number 36, who hits the front. Jenner recovering positions, he's through to 3rd. Jordan Miller sits up in 2nd position. The top 2 qualify, remember, so the battles further down the order are only about trying to get towards a position to challenge for a top 2 place. Also for championship points, particularly in the context of the Adult Intermediate Championship, as we've said, of course, because at the moment Christopher Jenner sits in 3rd place in this race, and that would be enough for him to take 3rd overall in this meeting in the Adult Intermediate class, because the top 2 would be Sean Kelly, who's already progressed, and Joe Banks in the order that they finish in the final, with Christopher Jenner, who's outside the qualification positions in this race at the moment, the next best finisher in the adult intermediate class. We'll work through the championship standings later on. For the moment, the focus on the top 3, because Christopher Jenner is coming on strong. Joe Banks over the last lap or so, slowing up Jordan Miller. Christopher Jenner almost alongside, takes a lunge from way back, but backs out of it at the last moment. He'll build his attack once again. We're into the closing stages now. Jenner trying to find a way through into the top 2. That will give him a shot at a top 2 place in today's meeting in the adult intermediate category. As he is in 3rd position in this race, he stands to make it onto the podium, and Matthew Porter will miss out on a place on the podium. The current championship leader in the adult intermediate class is down in 4th in this one, and now under pressure from Wesley Agius actually for 4th place in this race, as Christopher Jenner gets a brilliant run off turn number 2, sends Jordan Miller out wide, and Miller gets it all wrong into turn number 3, and he's going to lose a whole host of places here, and we lose yet another pro rider from the ranks of the grand final. But on the final turn, real drama for Jordan Miller, who will score championship points but will be restricted to just 6 as he fails to make it through to the grand final, where the top 10 in the pro category and now the top 3 in the adult intermediate class the top 9 in the pro category and the top 3 in the adult intermediate class will now be settled after that last bend lunge from Christopher Jenner sees him through to P2. He and Joe Banks march through to the final at the expense of Jordan Miller, who's relegated down to 5th position in that race. His battle was to try and extend his night by making it through to the final. There were no other pro riders still in that race after the demolition derby of a semi-final stage. So Miller then is eliminated Matthew Porter collecting 12 championship points, Wesley Agers collecting 11 in the adult intermediate class, George Sturgis and Martin Mills completing the finishers in that LCQ, but it's Banks and Jenner who move forward. Round 3 of the 2018 Indian Motorcycles DTRA UK Flat Track Nationals reaches its climax here at Redcar as the top 9 pro positions and the 3 podium positions in the adult intermediate class are about to be settled in a winner-takes-all final. 20 championship points up for grabs. We've had 2 different winners in the 2 rounds so far. Toby Hales at round 1 and wildcard former champion Aidan Collins at round 2. Could we see a 3rd different winner in the 3rd round in 2018? Riders selecting their starting positions on the basis of their finishing rankings in the semi-final stages, and we explained that at the time. Gerard Bilo and Rob Meir would be the top seeds. Bilo had first starting position selection. He's gone from gate 2. Rob Meir directly on the inside of him. Then it was Michael Dijkstra on the inside of that front row, and Toby Hales who completes row number 1. So across the line for the grand final then on the front row, Michael Dijkstra, the Dutchman, Rob Meir off gate 2, Gerard Bilo off 3, and Toby Hales, the current championship leader, goes off the outside. We have got the top 2 in the current championship standings, both lining up off the front row of the grid, and Rob Meir with his 2nd grand final appearance since joining the DTRA, who sits 13th in the championship standings at the moment. He looks set to make progress upon that ranking, having missed the opening round at Kings Lynn and joined us in time for the MCN Festival at Peterborough. Settling in now for row number 2, we've got Gary Birtwistle, currently 4th in the standings, lining up off the inside of that middle row. Alongside him, George Pickering, who hasn't quite had things his own way so far. A 2nd place in his heat race and then a 3rd in semi-final number 2. He likewise lines up off the middle row, gate number 2 for him. Sean Kelly, the top performing of the intermediate riders in the semi-final stages, will go off gate 3 in that middle row. And James Andrew completes the middle row off the outside start position. Failed to score last time out at Peterborough. He's going to pick up a decent haul of championship points by making it to the final here today. The back row then, Paul Young, Grant Martin, Joe Banks and Christopher Jenner, 2 of the intermediate riders with work to do, with Sean Kelly directly ahead of them, the number 33. 2 battles in 1 as we get underway with the grand final here at Redcar. Rob Meir it is who takes the whole shot, side by side between the 2 international riders for 2nd, but it's Dijkstra who locks it up and loses a place. Hales comes through, and Gary Birtwistle trying to bundle past as well. They resume their rivalry from the semi-final stages. Birtwistle has indeed managed to get through into 4th place, so it's Meir who leads them. It's Bilo in 2nd. Bilo looking to the inside, coming off turn number 2. Fight for 3rd behind. Hales under pressure. Doesn't look as comfortable as he did at the opening round at Kings Lynn, and Gary Birtwistle making a long move around the outside line, using a little bit of a banking here at the South Tees Motorsports Park to try and get on terms for 3rd position. Hales covers the inside line well, but Gary Birtwistle goes all the way around the outside. A brilliant move there off turn number 2 from Gary Birtwistle. Run the yellow flags for an incident coming around turns 3 and 4, but the positions weren't likely to change at that stage anyway. Hales making a lunge back around the inside into turns 1 and 2. Birtwistle getting a really nice ride just on the edge of the cushion there as they go into turn 3 and 4 once again. Bilo all the way around the outside of Meir. Meir moves to block, shuts out the challenge. Bilo's going to come around the outside again into turns 1 and 2. He too is using the cushion. Meir as close as you like to the inside line, but Bilo goes all the way around the outside and then cuts across the front of Meir into the top turn. He holds it on the pits bend. Meir tries to get back on terms, but almost goes up the back of Gerard Bilo. Bilo again exposed around the inside as he leaves a bit of room into turn number 1, but that should now have settled in as Bilo pulls clear down the back straight, and now the focus on the remaining positions on the podium. Bilo the clear race favourite. Birtwistle looking to the inside of Meir. Meir started to get scrappy since Bilo hit the front, and he's going to come under pressure now. The number 500, one of the rookie riders in 2018 with the DTRA, Gary Birtwistle, looking to the outside of him once again on the pits turn. Birtwistle really making that line hook up well, but Meir blocks him out, and that's going to give the momentum to Toby Hales back into turns 1 and 2. Birtwistle sent wider than he wants to go to stay in front of Hales, and Hales carves his way through into a provisional podium place. He locks it up coming off the 2nd bend. Birtwistle again has the momentum, again has the outside line, but Hales is wily enough to close down that attack, and we now have 3 podium favourites pulling clear out in front. Gerard Bilo, Rob Meir in 2nd position, Toby Hales in 3rd, still close between the top 6 with a big gap now emerging behind the top 6, and a separate fight of course for the podium positions in the adult intermediate class, directly behind that top 6, with Sean Kelly fighting Joe Banks over 7th in the race, which is top spot in the adult intermediate category. Seeing the group of 4 bundling down the back straight, fighting for 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th places, with a bit of a margin starting to extend behind them, as I said. Dijkstra now looking for a way past Gary Birtwistle for 4th position. Birtwistle is holding up the Dutchman now and enabling Meer and Hales to escape away in 2nd and 3rd. Dijkstra keen then to dispatch Gary Birtwistle and go off in pursuit. Meanwhile, Hales is sizing up a manoeuvre on Rob Meer. We've seen Hales be the hero of last bend overtakes when he's needed to be, but Meer has ridden a pretty controlled race. He was a little bit flappable in the middle stages of the race once Bilo passed him, but he's managed to settle down once again now in P2, and Hales looks set for 3rd position. This will be his lowest finish of the campaign so far, tied in with Bilo's best and his first ever race victory, first ever grand final victory with the DTRA. That's going to narrow things up at the top of the championship standings, but the top 2 will break clear as we see the battle further down the order. There is Joe Banks just ahead of James Andrew. So James Andrew further down the order with Christopher Jenner in the mix as well. I think that's the battle for 8th, 9th and 10th positions. So Sean Kelly has broken a little bit clear of those riders. We see Grant Martin there just pulling up, enabling the lead lap runners to get through without having to work hard against back markers. Grant Martin 11th position at the moment, but it's Gerard Bilo who takes the checkered flag here in Redcar ahead of Rob Meer, the Spaniard's first ever victory with the DTRA. He's come close on 2 occasions. He was pipped on the final turn in Kings Lynn, but he gets his revenge on Toby Hales here with a good pass on Rob Meer in the early stages. He celebrates with his team on the pits turn. Rob Meer, a good day for him as well. 2 race victories and then a 2nd place in the grand final. Much more to come, I suspect, from the number 500. This a track he is familiar with, of course, from his Speedway days, but Rob Meer to make it onto his first DTRA podium deserves an awful lot of credit, particularly for the way in which he held off Toby Hales for the majority of that race. Hales getting past Gary Birtwistle for 3rd position. Birtwistle holding off the attentions of Michael Dijkstra. Dijkstra's worst finish of the day in the grand final, but he still takes 5th, ahead of George Pickering, somewhat isolated in 6th position. Meanwhile, as for the adult intermediate class, we caught a glimpse of their battle. Sean Kelly just up ahead of a group of Joe Banks, James Andrew and Christopher Jenner, who round out the top 10 and the lead lap finishers in that grand final. So the finishing order in the adult intermediate class, Sean Kelly gets 7th and the 20 championship points. Joe Banks finishing 8th there gets 16, and Christopher Jenner in 10th place gets 14 championship points. But the focus was on the battling up front and a group of 6 riders who really went together, and I suspect that those are the same 6 riders that we'll see in direct confrontation for the title of UK Flat Track National Champion in the remainder of this 2018 season. Your podium trio here in Redcar. 3rd place, the championship leader Toby Hales. He maintains his position at the top of the standings, but his gap is narrowed to meeting winner, first time meeting winner with the DTRA, Gerard Bilo.
It's a bit of a shock to the system. Normally 4 laps around Redcar back in the day, but it's sort of a whole speedway meeting in one race there. So, but no, if it started to feel good.
Rob is very difficult pass because the start is very strong, and is the rider of speedway. The line is very different of me. Finally I try to the exterior. I am a little bit more fast, and finally it's possible pass and win the race with a good gap.
So a look at the updated championship standings, first of all in the adult intermediate class. Well, there haven't been too many riders who've been able to offer much in the way of consistency in 2018. Matthew Porter is the only rider to have picked up a double-figure championship score at each of the 3 rounds so far. And he is the series leader on 44 points, but he misses out on a place in the final and therefore a place on the podium. The top 3 here today, Christopher Jenner, who scores 14 points, that's double his previous best total. He moves up to 8th overall, 2nd place going the way of Joe Banks, and after his victory at round number 2, he moves clear in 2nd position in the standings ahead of podium finisher from the opening 2 rounds, Martin Mills, who misses out at round number 3. Mills slips to 3rd place, Banks moves up to 2nd, and Matthew Porter sees his gap cut at the top of the standings, but he still leads by 3 points heading in to round number 4. Meanwhile, in the pro category, it's Toby Hale still out in front, but his advantage is slashed by 6 points. And now Gerard Bailo sits just 2 points in arrears of the series lead. A group starting to develop behind those two riders. 14 points the deficit for George Pickering, who's been consistent but not quite able to make it up towards the top steps of the podium. Just a single podium finish from 3 rounds, and Pickering sits in third place on 34 points. Gary Birtwistle ahead of him here today closes up and is now just 2 points back. But our 3 podium finishers here in Redcar, I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of them in the remainder of 2018. Series leader Toby Hales, our rookie up in 5th in the standings now, Rob Meir, and a first-time winner with the DTRA, Spaniard Gerard Bailo.